Reading from Fulgrim by Graham McNeil. Visions of Treachery. In Chapter 19, An Error in Judgment. Ferrus Manus kept his most prized relics and personal creations within the Iron Forge. Its gleaming walls were fashioned from smooth, glassy basalt and hung with all manner of wondrous weapons, armor, and machinery crafted by the Primarch's silver hands. A vast anvil of iron and gold sat in the center of the forge, and Ferrus Manus had long ago declared that none, save his brother Primarchs, were permitted to enter this most private sanctum. Fulgrim himself had only set foot in it once before. Vulcan of the 18th Legion had once declared it a magical place, using the language of the ancients to describe the magnificence it contained. To honor Ferrus's skill, Vulcan had presented him with a fire drake banner, which hung next to a wondrously crafted gun with a top-loading magazine and perforated barrel formed in shapes of snarling dragon. Its brass and silver body comprised of the finest workmanship Fulgrim had ever seen. He paused before it, its lines and curves so beautiful that to simply label it a weapon was to deny it was in fact a work of art. "I made that for Vulcan 200 years ago," said Ferrus, "before he led his legion into the Mordant stars." "So why is it still here?" "You know what Vulcan's like. He loves to work the metal and doesn't trust anything that hasn't had the beat of a hammer laid upon it or fire of the forge in its heart." Ferrus held up his shimmering, mercurial hands and said, "I don't think he liked the fact that I could shape metal without heat or a hammer. He returned it to me a century ago, saying that it should remain here with its creator. I think Nocturne's superstitions aren't as forgotten as our brother would have us believe." Fulgrim reached up to touch the weapon, but curled his fingers into a fist before they touched the warm metal. To touch such a perfect weapon without firing it would be wrong. "I understand there is a certain attraction in a handsomely made weapon. But to apply such artistry to a thing designed to kill seems extravagant," said Fulgrim. "Really?" chuckled Ferrus, hefting forge breaker and pointing it at Fireblade, sheathed at Fulgrim's hip. "Then what were we doing in the Uras?" Fulgrim drew his sword and turned it in his hands so that it caught the light and threw dazzling red reflections around the forge. "That was a contest," smiled Fulgrim. "I didn't know you then, and I wasn't going to have you outdo me, was I?" Ferrus circled the iron forge, pointing his warhammer at the magnificent creations he had wrought and which hung upon the walls. "There's nothing in weapons machinery or engineering devices that obliges them to be ugly, said Ferrus. Ugliness is a measure of imperfection. You, of all people, should appreciate that. Then you must be perfectly imperfect, said Fulgrim, his smile robbing the comment of malice. I'll leave being pretty to you and Sanguinius, my brother. I'll stick to fighting. Now come, what's this all about? You speak of the future of the Great Crusade, and then want to talk of weapons in old times. What's going on? Fulgrim tensed, suddenly anxious at what he was about to ask his brother. He had hoped to approach the matter circuitously, feeling out his brother's position and likelihood of him joining them willingly. But with typical Medusan directness, Ferrus Manus had come right out and demanded to know his purpose. How artless and blunt. When did you last see the Emperor? Asked Fulgrim. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. I just couldn't stay away from Fulgrim. Next to Eisenhorn, it's one of my favorite Warhammer novels. Mostly because of Fulgrim himself. He's the Lulu. But in the best way. My favorite Primarchs are definitely Lorgar. Okay, let me take that back. I take that back. My favorite Legion is the Word Bearers. My favorite Primarch is Vulcan. Vulcan lives. But as far as just a character in Warhammer, next to Eisenhorn, there's Fulgrim. My god, today. And then there's Ferrus Manus. You'd almost say that he is the direct opposite of Fulgrim, which makes them two sides of the same coin, which is why they are so perfectly matched in friendship and brotherhood, where Fulgrim is outwardly elaborate, seeking physical perfection, seeking mastery of all crafts. Ferrus Manus is quietly perfected. You may have heard, well, no, you did hear if you were listening in the reading, that Ferrus has the ability to mold metal as one would in a forge without the need of a forge. He has on his hands what's called a necrodermis. It is a silver skin, basically, that only someone like a Primarch could stand to have molded to his body, but it enables him to craft things with his hands that would usually need great fire and tools to do, and he can just do it at his will. It's a very unique feature amongst the Primarchs, kind of like Vulcan being a perpetual and Sanguinius having wings. Very unique, even amongst the demigods. And that can make some of his brothers reject him. But as we see Fulgrim in Ferrus's inner sanctum and looking at the things that Ferrus had made, he even notices, wow, you make weapons that are beautiful. These are meant for killing. Why even make them beautiful? And that's where that quiet perfection of Ferrus comes in. Just because it's a weapon doesn't mean it has to be ugly. Ugly belies imperfection, and we don't do that here. Fulgrim is flamboyant. Let's just say it. He is. He's flamboyant. He is proud. He has an ego the size of Jupiter. And his legion is one of the earlier legions to fall to chaos. So as you traipse further into the Horus Heresy, you have to keep reading, because all of the books, all of the legions start to connect to one another. You'll see, oh, Erebus showing up in multiple books. You'll say, oh, this is how the foundations for what we call the Inquisition are laid. Or, oh, okay, see, I see why Lorgar is at this point in the timeline and not this point. Where are the white scars? Just out there doing their own thing. But you start to see the dots connecting and the story makes more sense. There's kind of a lag in the middle of the Horus Heresy series where it just felt like they were telling the same story over and over and once in a while interjecting something new. But then they picked it back up. And we finally made it to the War for Terror, although I haven't even cracked that set of books yet. I have so much to read. But that's a good problem, actually. It means finding more motivation to find time to do things that I love versus, just always, doing other things. But these are two very interesting characters, Ferrus and Fulgrim. Fulgrim seeks perfection, but he wants recognition for his perfection. He wants from the outside to him for it to be said, you are perfect. Ferrus doesn't desire that, the Gorgon. He's also called. Ferrus desires that things be perfected. And he desires to be one who creates things that are perfect. It's a very interesting relationship between them. When Ferrus and Fulgrim first met, it was a competition between the two of them. Two demigods show up on the same planet. So they were basically shut away. And then a competition ensued where both of them created a weapon within a forge. Ferrus Manus creates a sword. And Fulgrim created a hammer. Firebird and Forgebreaker. And when they emerged with equally magnificent weapons, it sealed their brotherhood. They were no longer in competition in that moment, but they were true brothers in arms. And they exchanged weapons as a sign of their fraternity and their bond with one another. It's interesting because amongst the Primarchs, you will notice that some have better relationships than others. That's true of any family that has multiple siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and the rest of it. There will be those that you get along better with than others. I only have one sibling, but I have a lot of cousins. And I have one cousin out of all of them that I talk to the most. And she and I have a great relationship. Anytime we're in the same city, we hang out together if we're able to. We are very similar in personality. So it's cool to hang out. We have a good time talking together. We have some real life situations, so it's great. And then I have a whole bunch of other cousins. And when I see them at a wedding or a holiday, I'm like, hey, it's great to meet you. Great to see you. But we don't go out of our way to talk to each other. And there's nothing wrong with that. When there's a bunch of people to choose from, everyone's not going to 100% talk to each other all the time. Everyone's not going to get along perfectly all the time. And you'll notice as you read through the books, if you're a lore person like I am, you connect the dots between which relationships between Primarchs are driving story at one point. Then they're, out there, Alpharius Omegon doing his own thing, just being special. But the Primarchs find brotherhood with one another. They don't see each other very often. You know how big space is? I mean, even the part that we know about, you know how big it is, and then a lot of what we see in, pictures and satellite imaging and stuff like that, it's hard for our brain to even fathom how far away those things truly are. One of the great dates my husband took me on before we got married, we went up to an observatory and he booked us some time late at night to sit with a couple of astronomers who controlled the telescopes, and they literally took us on a tour of the stars. And then they printed out the images of the stars and stuff we looked at, but they were explaining where stuff was, how far away it was, how long it would take us as humans to get there, if we physically could even get there. It was incredible, absolutely incredible. I saw things that night that I probably will never get to see again in my lifetime, because in that moment, that particular star was in that position, or that asteroid or whatever it was in that position. Never see it again. The Primarchs don't see each other because space is that vast. Once in a while, they run across one another. Subspace messages happen, but they don't see each other. And when they do see each other, they try to reform those bonds of brotherhood between them. They have competitions. They don't really have feasts or anything because they don't have to eat. you know, but there's always some kind of martial combat, some kind of artistry, some kind of building. They all have a specialty. Perturabo's out there being the greatest builder who ever lived. You know, Sanguinius is just being beautiful. You know, Mortarion, we'll talk about him later. You know, but they all have a specialty, and when they get together, they bond over the things that they love. They share their interests. They remind each other how special they are to be brothers under the emperor. But what happens when one of the siblings, or more in this case, turns against the father and wants to bring their closest brother along with them? This is a really interesting meeting that happens here. Fulgrim loves Ferrus. Ferrus loves Fulgrim. They are brothers. They are soul bonded. They are closer to one another than they are to their father or any of their other brother Primarchs. But one of them has gone to the dark side. You know, it's the kind of thing that does happen in conflict. I think the closest, at least as an American, that I can think that's happened in our history, because remember, we can only speak to real and historical events from a place of our own experience, or at least historical experience, because I wasn't there for this, would be the Civil War. You know, Civil Wars period, which if you don't know what a civil war is, America's not the only country to have had one. Civil war means internal. It is a country's civilization rising up against itself for a reason. That's why it's called civil. There's not the involvement of other nations. It's just happening within the borders. But we all know what the American Civil War was about. You know, North versus South. Now we're one union. But that was a war that did split households. I think that's one of the reasons, you know, when I talk through Eisenhorn and wrap that up in comparing him to historical figures that had to make choices that were in the gray area to achieve a greater good. That's why Warhammer works, is you can tell the writers have done their research. They are not just students of fantasy and science. They're students of history. They're students of human character. They understand how and why people work the way they do, which is why the stories are so compelling. The Civil War did split households. Literally, one part of the family on one side and another part of the family on the other. A son fighting for the North, a son fighting for the South, a brother fighting for the North, a brother fighting for the South. And regardless of what one's opinion is on that portion of history, I cannot imagine being the mother or the father of sons who were split on which side they would shed blood for. That's a terrible choice. There are no right answers with choices like that. Those are families being torn apart from the inside. And when things tear from the inside, they often cannot be put back together. When the foundation of something is cracked and pulled out from under itself, it doesn't go back to the way it was. And that's what's happening within the legions. It is a civil war. They have a united goal under the emperor to have this great crusade and spread humans' advancement across the galaxy, manifest destiny in the stars, reunite the human races. But half of them aren't with it anymore. That's the short version of the fall to chaos and heresy. Half of them aren't with it anymore. And if you aren't with us, you're against us. And they have chaos on their side. While the emperor is a supremely powerful being, while he's shut up in the Himalayan palace, chaos is not weak. The denizens of chaos are equally, if not more powerful than the emperor of mankind. But they're not really the starters of wars, they're the benefiters of chaos. That's why they're called chaos. I would almost call chaos itself a neutral evil. It's not that they want to cause bad, but the world is more interesting if it happens, and they're all for it. you know? Um, and these two closest brothers, one who has fallen to chaos and one who still has the vision of the Father. People have had that happen in their lives where they've watched a partner, a sibling, a friend who is as close as a sibling fall into darkness. People who fall into addiction. People who lose themselves in their jobs. People who join a religious sect that takes them away from reasonable living and socializing. We see it happen all the time. Families split over meaning and moment, over cause and causality. And now Fulgrim is going to bring his offer to Ferrus Manus because he loves his brother. And he doesn't want to fight his brother. He wants his closest brother, his best friend, his kindred spirit, to join them. To join with chaos. But as you read, Fulgrim already knows what Ferrus's choice will be. But he has to make the offer, even though he's been imbued with chaos and he desires war. He's still human at his core, and he wants his brother to live. So he's going to offer his brother a choice, even though he already knows what Ferrus is going to choose. The Emperor. What has that got to do with anything? Indulge me. When was it? A long time ago, admitted Ferrus. Urina Septimus, on the crystal headlands above the acid oceans. I last saw him on Ulanor at the War Master's coronation, said Fulgrim, moving towards the great anvil and trailing his fingers along the cold metal. I wept when he told us that he believed the time had come for him to leave the crusading work to his sons, and that he was returning to Terra to undertake a still higher calling. The great triumph, nodded Ferrus sadly. I was on campaign in the Kalor Nebula and far too distant to attend personally. It is the one regret I have, not being able to say my farewells to our father. I was there, said Fulgrim, his voice choked with emotion. I stood on the dais, next to Horus and Dorn, when the Emperor told us he was leaving. And it was the second most heartbreaking moment of my life. We begged him to stay, to see out what he had begun. But he turned his back on us. He would not even say what this great work was, only that were he not to return to Terra, then all we had won would fall and crumble into ruins. Ferrus Manus looked up at him. His eyes narrowed. You talk as if he abandoned us. That's how it felt, said Fulgrim, his tone bitter. How it still feels. You said yourself that our father was returning to Terra to preserve all that we have fought for and bled for. Do you really think he would not have wanted to see the final victory of the crusade? I do not know, said Fulgrim angrily. He could have stayed. What difference would a few years make? What could be so important that he had to leave us there and then? Ferrus took a step towards him, and Fulgrim saw the reflection of his hurt and anger mirrored eyes of his brother. The betrayal of everything he and the Emperor's children had fought for over the last 200 years. I do not understand what you imply, Fulgrim, said Ferrus, his words trailing off as the import of Fulgrim's earlier words came to him. What did you mean when you said it was the second most heartbreaking moment of your life? What could have been greater than that? Fulgrim took a deep breath, knowing that he would have to come flat out and say what he had come to say. What could be greater than that? When Horus told me the truth of how the Emperor had betrayed us and planned to cast us aside in his quest for godhood, said Fulgrim, relishing the horrified expression of surprise and fury on his brother's face. Fulgrim, shouted Ferrus, what in terror is wrong with you? Betrayed us? Godhood? What are you talking about? Fulgrim took quick steps to stand before Ferrus Manus, his voice passionate now that he had taken the final step and confessed his true reason for coming. Horus has seen the truth of things, my brother. The Emperor has already abandoned us and even now plots his apotheosis. He lied to us all, Ferrus. We were nothing more than tools to win back the galaxy in preparation for his ascension. The perfect being he pretended to be was a filthy lie. Ferrus pushed him off and backed away, his ruddy, craggy features pale and horrified. Knowing he had to press on, Fulgrim said, Others have already seen this truth and are moving to join Horus. We will strike before the Emperor is even aware that his designs have become unmasked. Horus will reclaim the galaxy in the name of those whose blood was spent to conquer it. Fulgrim wanted to laugh as the words spilled from him, the thrill of finally unburdening himself almost too great to stand. The breath heaved in his lungs, and he could not tell whether the thundering he could hear was the blood surging in his skull or the hammers of faraway forges. Ferrus Manus shook his head, and Fulgrim despaired as he saw his brother's horror turning to fury. This is the new direction of the crusade you spoke of. Yes, cried Fulgrim. It will be a glorious age of perfection, my brother. What we have won is already being given away to imperfect mortals who will waste the glories we've won for them. What we have earned in blood and tears will be ours again. Can't you see that? All is betrayal, Fulgrim, roared Ferrus. You are not talking about claiming back what we have won. You are talking about betraying everything we stand for. My brother, implored Fulgrim, please, you must listen to me. The Mechanicum has already pledged its support to the War Master, as have many of our brothers. War is coming. War that will engulf this galaxy in flames. When it is over, there will be no mercy for those on the wrong side. And I think that's a great place to stop today. What do you think? We will pick up next Warhammer Wednesday with the battle between brothers. Can't you hear the desperation in both of their voices? Both equally convinced that the other is wrong and wanting to save them? If that's not love and brotherhood, then I don't know what is. I think one of the greatest lessons I've taken from reading the Warhammer novels and diving into the lore is there's so much gray. Everyone wants to make decisions based on hard and fast, black and white criteria, which I'm a human. I have a set of morals and standards I live by, but I can't expect everybody else to live by those. Because if I have that unrealistic expectation, it will greatly reduce the amount of people that I'm allowed to do fellowship with. And as a type A driver personality, I need people in my life. It's how wars start. It's how families are splintered. When people dig their heels in so deep to what they believe to be right, whether it objectively is or not, that's how society breaks down. That's when siblings no longer speak. That's when families are fractured. And that's when civilizations turn in on themselves. Man, these Warhammer writers are good. As usual, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll pick up their story in the next one.